The gunshot echoed through the dusty air of Williamsburg, Colorado, just as Katherine Daniels slammed the door of her ranch house, tears streaming down her face. The year was 1875, and she had just buried her husband, the third tragedy to strike her in as many years. First her parents, then her brother, and now Jacob. The once thriving 40-acre ranch that had been her dream now felt like a prison of memories. "Miss Daniels," a deep voice called from beyond her porch. "The sheriff sent me to check on you." Katherine wiped her tears hastily, smoothing her black mourning dress before reluctantly opening the door. There stood Thomas Sinclair, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. She recognized him from town, one of the newer cowboys who'd come to work at the neighboring Shaw Ranch about 6 months ago. His dark brown hat was clutched respectfully in his hands, revealing sandy hair that caught the dying light. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hollow. "Tell Sheriff Porter I appreciate his concern, but I don't need looking after." Thomas shifted his weight, dust rising around his worn boots. "With all due respect, madam, I didn't ride all this way just to turn back with a message. The sheriff mentioned you might need help with the ranch." "Just until you get your bearings." Katherine's blue eyes flashed with sudden anger. "My bearings? My husband isn't even cold in his grave, Mr. Sinclair, and already the town assumes I can't manage on my own." "That's not what I've managed worse," she cut him off. "Thank you for your concern, but I have work to do." She began to close the door. Thomas put his hand up, not touching the door but making her pause. "The fence on your west pasture is down. I spotted it riding in. Your cattle will wander onto Shaw property by morning." Katherine closed her eyes briefly, adding another problem to her mental list of troubles. "I'll see to it tomorrow. It'll be too late by then." Thomas settled his hat back on his head. "I've got my tools. Won't take more than an hour. I can't pay you. Didn't ask for payment, madam." Something in his steady gaze made Katherine relent. She nodded once, watching as he turned back toward his horse, a chestnut gelding waiting patiently by her water trough. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Katherine found herself on the porch, a lantern in hand, watching Thomas hammer the fence posts back into place. His movements were efficient, practiced. There was something comforting about seeing a capable man fixing what was broken. But it also twisted the knife of her new reality. Jacob would never again be the one repairing their fences. "You didn't have to wait up," Thomas said as he approached the porch, tools in hand. His face was half-shadowed in the lantern light. "I wanted to thank you properly," Katherine replied. "Would you care for some coffee before you ride back?" Thomas hesitated only a moment before nodding. "That would be welcome, thank you." Inside her kitchen, Katherine busied herself with the stove while Thomas stood awkwardly by the door, as if afraid to fully enter the home of a recently widowed woman. "You can sit, Mr. Sinclair. I don't bite." She gestured to the wooden table. He removed his hat again and took a seat. "Just Thomas, please." "Then I'm Katherine." She poured the coffee into 2 mismatched cups, though most people call me Kate. When she joined him at the table, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. It was Thomas who finally broke it. "I'm sorry about your husband." Jacob was well respected in town. Katherine stared into her cup. 3 years we were married. He promised me a lifetime." "Life rarely keeps our bargains," Thomas said softly. She looked up at him then, really seeing him for the first time. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but he couldn't have been more than 30. His eyes were a clear, steady green, honest eyes, her father would have called them. But there was something else there too, something that recognized pain. "You sound like a man who knows something about broken promises," she said. A sad smile touched his lips. "We all have our stories, Katherine." "Kate," she corrected him, surprising herself. Jacob had been the only one to call her Katherine. Their conversation drifted to safer topics: the weather, the price of cattle, town gossip. When Thomas finally stood to leave an hour later, Katherine felt a strange reluctance to see him go. "I'll be by tomorrow to check the rest of your fences," he said, standing on her porch. "That's really not necessary. Running a ranch alone is near impossible," he interrupted gently. "Let someone help you, Kate, just until you find your footing." "Too tired to argue," she nodded. "Thank you, Thomas." As she watched him ride away, Katherine wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill. For the first time since the funeral, she didn't feel completely alone. True to his word, Thomas returned the next day, and the next. He never stayed longer than necessary to complete whatever task he'd set for himself: mending fences, fixing the leaky roof, helping with the cattle. Katherine found herself looking forward to his visits, though she tried to maintain her distance, reminding herself that she was still in mourning. 2 weeks after Thomas's first visit, Katherine was struggling with a stubborn calf that had gotten separated from its mother when he arrived. "Need a hand?" Thomas asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. "This little one doesn't seem to understand we're trying to help," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling around her face in untidy waves. Together, they managed to corral the calf back to its mother. Katherine couldn't help but laugh when the calf immediately began to nurse, all its previous resistance forgotten. "That's a nice sound," Thomas said, leaning against the fence beside her. "What is your laugh? I haven't heard it before." Katherine's smile faded. "Haven't had much reason to laugh lately." Thomas nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "Life has a way of continuing, even when we think it shouldn't." That evening, Katherine invited Thomas to stay for supper, the first real meal she'd cooked since Jacob's death. They ate on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Why are you doing this?" She finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Helping me, I mean." Thomas set his plate down. "Because I know what it's like to feel like everything you've built is crumbling around you, and I know how much difference a helping hand can make." "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low. "I had a wife back in Texas and a little boy." Katherine's heart constricted. "Had influenza, took them both in '69. Nathan was only 4. His eyes held a faraway look. "After they died, I couldn't bear to stay, so I drifted, worked ranches all over, never stayed in one place too long." "Until Williamsburg," Katherine said. Thomas nodded. "Something about this valley felt, I don't know, like maybe I could stop running." The honesty of his confession touched her. Here was someone who truly understood loss, who had survived it. "I'm sorry about your family," she said. "It was a long time ago." He looked at her directly. "But I remember how raw it feels at first, like an open wound that nothing can heal." Katherine felt tears well up. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "The pain changes," he said gently. "Becomes something you carry, rather than something that carries you." As summer turned to fall, Thomas became a constant presence at the Daniels ranch. Katherine found herself relying on him more than she'd intended, not just for the physical labor but for the companionship. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Whispers followed her when she went to the general store or the post office. A widow spending so much time with a single man was bound to raise eyebrows, even if their relationship remained strictly proper. "Mrs. Everson asked if we were courting," Katherine mentioned one evening as they finished the barn chores together. Thomas froze in the act of hanging up a bridle. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were a kind neighbor helping a widow in need," Katherine replied, not meeting his eyes. "Nothing more. Is that all I am to you, Kate?" His voice was careful, measured. Catherine's hand stilled on the curry brush she was holding. "I don't know what you are to me, Thomas, and that frightens me." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent that always clung to him. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I don't think I can ever be ready again," she whispered. "My heart isn't just broken, Thomas, it's shattered." Their eyes met in the dim light of the barn. "Kate, no," she stepped back. "Please don't say things that will make this harder. You've been a good friend when I needed one desperately. Let's not complicate that." Thomas studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "As you wish." The first snow came early that year, blanketing Williamsburg in white overnight. Katherine woke to find her world transformed, pristine and silent. She was checking on her chickens when Thomas rode up, his horse's breath pluming in the cold air. "Thought you might need help clearing your path," he called, a shovel tied to his saddle. Katherine smiled despite herself. "Always my knight in snow-covered armor." They worked together to clear a path to the barn, their breath creating clouds in the crisp air. When they finished, Katherine insisted Thomas come inside to warm up. As she made hot coffee, Katherine became acutely aware of Thomas's presence in her kitchen, his broad shoulders, the way he carefully removed his boots at the door, the gentle way he spoke to her. Over the past months, he'd become essential to her in a way she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, warming his hands around the coffee mug. "I know you've been worried about keeping the ranch going through winter." Katherine nodded. With Jacob gone, managing the cattle through the harsh Colorado winter would be nearly impossible alone. "I've saved a fair bit from my work at Shaw's," he continued. "Enough to buy in as a partner if you'd be amenable." Katherine blinked in surprise. "You want to buy into my ranch?" "Our ranch," he corrected gently. "If you agreed. I've got experience and you've got the land. Together we might make a go of it." "As business partners," Katherine clarified. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. "For now, yes." The implication of his words hung between them. Katherine felt her heart race, equal parts fear and something warmer she wasn't ready to name. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Thomas nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Take all the time you need." 2 days later, a blizzard swept through the valley, the worst in living memory according to the old-timers in Williamsburg. Katherine woke to howling winds that rattled her windows and snow piling higher than her porch. By mid-morning, she was genuinely concerned about her cattle, huddled in the far pasture where the wind had driven them. Bundling up in every layer she owned, Katherine fought her way to the barn, the wind nearly knocking her down twice. She was saddling her most sure-footed horse when she heard someone calling her name. Thomas appeared in the barn doorway, snow covering his coat and hat. "Kate, what are you doing?" "The cattle," she shouted over the wind. "They'll freeze if I don't bring them to the shelter of the trees." "You'll freeze if you go out there alone," he countered, striding toward her. "I came to help." Together they rode out into the storm. The going was treacherous, visibility reduced to mere feet ahead. They found the cattle huddled in a miserable group, already half buried in drifts. Working as a team, they began to drive the animals toward the sheltered grove of pines that would offer some protection from the wind. They were nearly there when Katherine's horse stumbled in a hidden ditch, throwing her into a snowdrift. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. "I'm fine," she insisted when Thomas dismounted to help her. "We need to finish with the cattle." "The cattle can wait," he said firmly, lifting her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body warm against her back. By the time they reached the ranch house, Katherine was shivering uncontrollably. Thomas carried her inside, setting her gently on the sofa before building up the fire to a roaring blaze. "Let me see that ankle," he said, kneeling before her. Katherine winced as he carefully removed her boot and sock. His hands were gentle as he examined the swollen joint. "Not broken, I think," he pronounced, "but a bad sprain. You'll need to stay off it for a few days." "I can't afford to be laid up," Katherine protested. "The ranch, I'll handle the ranch," Thomas interrupted. "You'll handle getting better." The storm raged for 3 days. Thomas stayed, sleeping on a bedroll by the fire while Katherine took the bedroom. Each morning, he would brave the elements to tend to the animals before returning to the house, bringing in more firewood, melting snow for water when the pump froze. In the evenings, they played cards or read aloud to each other from Katherine's small collection of books. On the third night, as the wind finally began to die down, Katherine sat watching Thomas as he whittled by the fire. His hands moved with precision, coaxing a shape from the wood that was slowly revealing itself as a small horse. "You never told me you could carve," she said. Thomas smiled without looking up. "One of many hidden talents. What else don't I know about you?" He set down his knife, considering her question. "I can play the harmonica, though not well. I make a decent apple pie, and I've been half in love with you since the day I fixed your fence." Katherine's breath caught. "Thomas, you don't need to say anything," he said quickly. "I know you're not ready. I know you might never be ready, but I wanted you to know the truth of it." She stared at him, this man who had become the foundation of her new life. The man who asked for nothing but gave everything. "I'm too broken to love," she said, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Everything I've ever loved has been taken from me. I don't know if I have it in me to risk that again." The cowboy replied, his voice steady and sure. "I have enough love for both of us." The simple truth of his words broke something open inside her. Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks as Thomas crossed the room to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just a chance to see if what's broken can be mended." Katherine looked into his eyes and saw everything she feared and everything she longed for. Slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Thomas's hand came up to cradle her face. When they finally broke apart, Katherine felt breathless, her heart racing in a way it hadn't for longer than she could remember. "I can't promise you forever," she whispered against his lips. "I'm still afraid." "Then promise me today," Thomas answered. "And tomorrow we'll see about the next day." When the snow finally cleared enough for travel, Thomas reluctantly prepared to return to his lodgings at the Shaw Ranch. Standing on Katherine's porch, he seemed reluctant to leave. "I should be back tomorrow to help with the repairs to the chicken coop," he said, adjusting his hat. Katherine stepped closer to him. "Or you could stay." His eyebrows rose. "Kate, your reputation would be preserved if you stayed in the bunkhouse," she finished for him. "As my business partner." Thomas's face broke into a smile. "You're accepting my offer." "On a trial basis," she clarified, though her own lips curved upward. "We'll see how we manage through the winter." It was the beginning of a new chapter one neither of them had anticipated when Thomas first rode onto her property all those months ago. Winter in Colorado was harsh, but Katherine discovered that sharing the burden made it bearable. Thomas moved his few belongings into the bunkhouse, respecting the boundaries of propriety while working alongside her to keep the ranch functioning through the snow and cold. Their partnership blossomed in unexpected ways. Katherine found herself laughing more, the weight of grief lifting incrementally with each passing day. Thomas proved to be not just a skilled rancher but a patient teacher, showing Katherine techniques her father and husband had never bothered to explain. As February turned to March and the first hints of spring appeared in the valley, Thomas surprised Katherine by clearing a path through the melting snow to a small rise on her property. "What are we doing up here?" she asked as they reached the top, breathless from the climb. Thomas gestured at the view the ranch spread out below them, the mountains rising majestically in the distance, touched with the golden light of sunset. "This is what I see when I look at your land," he said. "Possibility, promise." Katherine turned to face him. "Our land now." Thomas took her hand, his expression serious. "Kate, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." Her heart skipped a beat. "All right. Are you happy with how things are between us?" Katherine considered the question carefully. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved into something neither friendship nor courtship, but somewhere in between touches that lingered, kisses stolen in the barn or by the firelight, but always with a certain restraint, as if both were afraid to fully cross the invisible line they'd drawn. "I'm happier than I thought I could be again," she answered truthfully. "But sometimes I wonder." "What do you wonder?" he prompted when she trailed off. "If I'm being unfair to you, keeping you at arm's length when you've given me so much." Thomas shook his head. "You've given me purpose again, Kate, a home. That's more than I've had in years." "But you want more," she said, recognizing the look in his eyes. "I want what you're ready to give," he corrected. "Not a moment before." Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "What if I told you I might be ready for more now?" The hope that blazed in Thomas's eyes made her heart ache. "I'd say that's the best news I've heard all year." That night, for the first time, Thomas didn't return to the bunkhouse. They sat before the fire long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams of their future. When Katherine finally led him to her bedroom, Jacob's bedroom, once she felt not guilt but a sense of rightness, as if life was realigning itself into a new pattern that could accommodate both her past and her present. In Thomas's arms, Katherine discovered parts of herself she'd thought forever lost to grief. Their lovemaking was tender at first, then passionate, a physical expression of all the feelings that had been building between them for months. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with her head on his chest, Katherine felt a peace she hadn't known since before her world began falling apart. "What are you thinking?" Thomas murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm not as broken as I thought," she answered. His arms tightened around her. "You never were, Kate. Wounded, yes. Scarred, certainly, but never broken beyond repair." April brought renewal to the land and to Katherine's heart. She and Thomas worked side by side to prepare for the spring calving, expanding the herd with careful planning and Thomas's expertise. The ranch that had once felt like a burden became a joy again, a shared project that bound them together as firmly as their growing love. It was during the town's spring festival that Katherine realized how completely her life had transformed. Standing beside Thomas as they watched the dancing in the town square, his hand warm in hers, she felt a contentment she'd never expected to find again. "Miss Daniels, Mrs. Everson approached, her perpetual curiosity barely disguised beneath her polite smile. "How lovely to see you out and about. And Mr. Sinclair, of course." "It's a beautiful day for a celebration," Katherine replied, noting the way the older woman's eyes darted to their joined hands. "Indeed it is. And might I say you're positively glowing, my dear. Happiness suits you." After Mrs. Everson moved on to her next target, Thomas leaned close to Katherine's ear. "She's right, you know. You are glowing." Katherine turned to face him. "That's your doing, Mr. Sinclair." His smile was tender. "Dance with me." As Thomas led her onto the makeshift dance floor, Katherine felt the eyes of the townspeople on them, some approving, others still judging the widow who had found love again, too soon by their standards. But for the first time, she found she didn't care. "They're talking about us," she murmured as Thomas's arm encircled her waist. "Let them talk," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. All that matters is what's between us." As they moved to the music, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From strangers to reluctant partners to lovers, each step had seemed impossible until it wasn't. "Marry me," Thomas said suddenly, the words so soft she almost thought she'd imagined them. Catherine's feet faltered. "What did you say?" Thomas guided her to the edge of the dance floor, taking both her hands in his. "I said marry me, Katherine Daniels. Be my wife. Let's build something permanent together." Her heart raced, equal parts joy and lingering fear. "Thomas, are you sure?" "After everything you've lost, because of everything I've lost," he interrupted gently. "I know how precious love is, how rare. I don't want to waste another day pretending we're just business partners when what I feel for you is so much more." Katherine looked into his eyes and saw no doubt, only certainty and love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place on a perfect day in late May, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the mountains standing witness. It was a simple ceremony on their ranch, attended by the handful of friends they'd made in Williamsburg. Katherine wore a dress of pale blue rather than traditional white, a nod to her past while embracing her future. Sheriff Porter, who had become a friend to them both, performed the ceremony. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Katherine felt not the shadow of her first marriage but the brightness of this new beginning. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now truly their home, Thomas presented Katherine with a small wooden box he'd carved himself. "A wedding gift," he explained as she opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. When Katherine opened it, she found a small, pressed wildflower on one side. "From the meadow where we first agreed to be partners," Thomas explained. "The other side is empty. For what?" she asked. He smiled, touching her cheek gently. "For whatever comes next in our story." As summer turned the valley lush and green, Katherine and Thomas settled into married life with a happiness that sometimes still surprised them both. The ranch prospered under their combined care, and their home became known for its hospitality to travelers passing through Williamsburg. It was on a hot August evening, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies rise from the grass, that Katherine took Thomas's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Kate." "Are you saying?" She nodded, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby." The look of wonder that transformed Thomas's face was something Katherine knew she would remember forever. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." Katherine felt his tears against her neck and held him tighter. They both knew what this meant: not a replacement for what they had lost, but a new branch on their family tree, one they would nurture together. That night, as they lay in bed with Thomas's hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. "I was so certain I would never find happiness again," she murmured. "After Jacob died, it felt like the end of everything." Thomas propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "And now I understand that endings can also be beginnings," she said, touching his face gently. "If you had told me a year ago that I would be here happy, in love, expecting a child, I would never have believed it." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Letting me into your life when you were so determined to go it alone?" Katherine smiled up at him. Not for a single moment. The months of Katherine's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Thomas threw himself into readying the nursery with the same dedication he brought to everything, crafting a cradle from the finest pine, and painting the small room with colors that reminded Katherine of spring. As her body changed, Katherine found herself marveling at the capacity of the human heart to heal and expand. The fear that had once paralyzed her that loving again meant risking unbearable loss gradually gave way to a deeper understanding that love itself was worth any risk. Winter came again, blanketing their world in white just as it had the year before when they first acknowledged their feelings for each other. On a snowy December night, with a blizzard raging outside reminiscent of the one that had forced them together, Katherine felt the first contractions begin. "It's too early to ride for the doctor," Thomas said, his face tight with worry as he helped her to their bed. "The snow's too deep." "Then it will be just us," Katherine replied, squeezing his hand through a contraction. "We can do this, Thomas." Through the long night, Thomas proved himself once again to be the partner Katherine had never dared hope for. He boiled water, prepared clean linens, and held her hand through each wave of pain, his strength never wavering even when his eyes betrayed his fear. As dawn broke, painting their bedroom in pale light filtered through the snowflakes still falling outside, Katherine gave one final push, and their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "He has your eyes," Thomas said in wonder as he placed the swaddled infant in Katherine's arms, his own cheeks wet with tears. Katherine looked down at their child, overwhelmed by the rush of love that flooded through her. "What shall we call him?" Thomas sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their son. "What about Jacob?" he suggested softly, "to honor your past." Katherine's eyes filled with tears at his generosity of spirit. "Jacob Nathan," she countered, "to honor both our pasts." Thomas pressed his lips to her temple, his voice thick with emotion. "Jacob Nathan Sinclair. Perfect." Spring came again, bringing new life to their land. Little Jake, as they called him, grew stronger each day, his curious eyes taking in the world around him with wonder that reminded both his parents of the miracle he represented. On a warm May afternoon, as their son napped in his cradle, Katherine found Thomas standing on the ridge where he had proposed, looking out over their property. The land was lush and green, cattle grazing contentedly in the distance, the house and barn freshly painted for the new season. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, slipping her hand into his. Thomas pulled her close, kissing her forehead before answering. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am, how fortunate that the sheriff sent me to check on you that day." Katherine smiled up at him. "I was so determined to push you away." "And I was equally determined to stay," he chuckled. "Stubborn, both of us." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come back the next day?" she asked. "If you'd respected my wishes to be left alone?" Thomas considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think fate would have found another way to bring us together, but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." Katherine laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I spent so long thinking I was too broken to ever love again, that my heart had been shattered beyond repair." "And now?" Thomas asked, his arms tightening around her. "Now I understand that being broken isn't the end of the story," she said. "It's just a part of it. The scars become part of who we are, but they don't have to define us." Thomas lifted her chin gently, his eyes full of love as they met hers. "I meant what I said that night by the fire. I had enough love for both of us until you found your way back to your own heart." "And now I have enough love for all three of us," Katherine replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him, "with plenty to spare." As they walked hand in hand back down the hill toward their home, toward their son, Katherine felt the rightness of their joined paths with a certainty that dispelled all lingering doubts. Life had broken them both, but together they had built something stronger from the pieces of love that honored their pasts while embracing their future. In the years that followed, the Sinclair Ranch became one of the most prosperous in Williamsburg. Katherine and Thomas added to their family a daughter, Emma Rose, born 2 years after Jake, and later, twin boys they named William and Henry, who brought equal measures of joy and chaos to their lives. The locket Thomas had given Katherine on their wedding day eventually held a small family portrait, all 6 Sinclairs squeezed together, their faces alight with happiness. It became Katherine's most treasured possession, a tangible reminder of the family they had created together. There were hard times, of course. Droughts that tested their resources, illnesses that brought fear, the normal conflicts that arise between 2 strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, they faced each challenge as they had from the beginning, side by side, drawing strength from each other when their own reserves ran low. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Katherine by planting a small grove of apple trees on the hill where he had proposed. "One for each year," he explained as they walked among the saplings, "and plenty of room for more." Katherine leaned against him, watching their children run and play among the young trees. Who would have thought that broken-hearted widow and the drifting cowboy would end up here? "I knew," Thomas said, his smile tender as he looked down at her. "From the moment you opened your door that first day, something in me recognized you, not just as someone I could love, but as someone who could teach me to live again." "We taught each other," Katherine corrected gently, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "And we're still learning every day." As twilight descended over their ranch, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, the Sinclairs gathered on their wide porch, the porch where Thomas had first asked to help, where Katherine had first invited him to stay. Jake, now 9, entertained his siblings with stories while Thomas and Katherine sat side by side in the rocking chairs they'd added when Emma was born. "Happy?" Thomas asked, reaching for Katherine's hand as they watched their children. Katherine squeezed his fingers, her heart full to overflowing. "More than I ever dreamed possible." Their eyes met in the fading light, a look that still held the same mixture of tenderness and passion that had sustained them through a decade together. In that moment, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that the greatest risk she had ever taken, opening her heart again, when she thought it beyond repair, had also been her greatest salvation. "I love you, Thomas Sinclair," she said simply. His smile was as warm and reassuring as it had been the day he told her he had enough love for both of them. "And I love you, Katherine Sinclair, today and always." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children's laughter echoing around them, Katherine and Thomas remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts bound together, 2 people who had once been broken, now made whole in the love they had built together.